All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our monthly compliance webinar. It's nice to see so many people in attendance here. Many of you I know me, but there are a couple new faces or new names, I guess. And so just to introduce myself, I'm Lavelle. I'm the compliance specialist for CTR. In a prior life, I was a partner in a very large law firm that my area of specialty was management side, labor and employment law. So all we did was represent employers who either needed advice or had gotten sued because of some violation of the law or alleged violation of the law. One of the areas that we saw the most questions on and some of the most difficulty and challenges for HR folks was leaves of absence. Oftentimes, HR folks and the company wanted to be humane and treat their employees well, but at some point, the tensions of running the business versus leaves of absence or accommodations became too great, and the discussion turned to, do we still have to keep this employee employed? So we're going to have a discussion today based on a single example, and we're going to work through a multitude of permutations as to what could happen depending on how big the employer is, how many hours the employee works, the type of condition the employee has that might have led to a request for a leave of absence, or maybe no request, and we are sitting there wondering if we should be proactive to do something. As most of you know, these webinars are recorded, and the slide deck and the webinar itself are made available usually within about 24 hours. There's also a SHRM code for 1 hour SHRM credit if you need that. All that will be made available after the webinar is done. We just need a little time to sort of get it together, and I don't handle that because I break technology. So people smarter than me handle that, and we will get that out to anybody who wants it. So a lot of you are already existing CTR clients, so you know everything that they provide. But for those of you who may just be friends at this point, a little slide so you can see what we do, and that's the end of the advertisement. Let's move on to how we usually do these webinars. Is if there is something important going on legislatively, before we dive into the main topic of the webinar, we will cover the legislative updates. And we actually do have a couple of things here. So we just finished a series of the One Big Beautiful Bill, 3 different webinars on it. And of course, one of the discussions was tipped employees. And when we did that webinar a couple months ago at this point, we talked about the fact that the IRS was supposed to issue guidance as to who was a customarily tipped employee. And there's some folks, it's a no-brainer, right? The server at the restaurant, the wait staff, the beauty industry, you know, whether that's the person who cuts your hair or gives you a massage or does the facial or manicure, whatever it is, that's pretty obvious that they are customarily tipped, usually delivery drivers too. But the list that the IRS published is much broader than what I would have considered customarily tipped folks. And so I've given you some odd examples of what's in that list. And if you Google the blue words here, the Federal Register, you can pull up the entire list to see if any of your employees are going to qualify to be a customarily tipped employee. So the list literally lists rickshaw drivers. That would not have crossed my mind as a common profession here, or one that gets tipped. Home movers, again, I don't know that I would have listed them as customarily tipped. Shuttle drivers, probably yes, you know, taking you to the airport or something. Locksmiths, thankfully, I've never had to use a locksmith. I would not have known, and maybe this is my own ignorance, that they ever get tipped. And so there's certain people like roadside assistance. I've had to call AAA before, unfortunately. Ran over that nail, had a flat tire, tipped as well. And again, maybe that's my perception or my ignorance about who normally gets tipped or doesn't get tipped. But there are a list of folks who kind of surprised me that were included in the customarily tipped individuals. So it's worth taking a look at, just to make sure that you're not missing somebody who could benefit from this tax break. The other thing that's out there is a Pennsylvania law that actually was passed a couple months ago that requires a posting come 1/1/26, listing the veterans' benefits available to veterans in an effort to help them. You right now don't have to do anything. And in fact, you shouldn't have to do much at all except get out the sticky tape or the thumbtack and hang this up. The Department of Labor and Industry, the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry, is supposed to make this sign or this poster for you so that you don't have to do anything other than get out the thumbtack and hang it up. It applies to employers with 50 or more full-time employees. So if you're tiny or smaller, it's not going to apply to you. But know that it's out there, and hopefully someday we're going to see the poster from the Department of Labor and Industry, and we'll know what it looks like, and we can just hang it up. Somebody asked a question, and please feel free to ask questions as we go on here. Somebody asked, and this goes back to the big, beautiful bill, but if there's a question on this, we certainly should touch on it. And it said, credit card tips are exempt. Only reported cash tips are exempt. Or I'm sorry, credit card tips are not exempt. Only reported cash tips are exempt. So that's not necessarily true. A credit card tip could qualify here as a tip. What doesn't qualify as a tip is a mandatory service charge. So if you say on the tab, there's an automatic service charge of 15% or something like that, all of a sudden you're in the land of that's not a voluntary tip. The whole crux of the issue is not whether it's on a credit card or whether it's a reported cash tip. The crux of the issue is whether or not it's a voluntary tip by the customer and not a mandated charge by the company. Okay, moving along here, there's one other item that we also publish on our social media, a What's the Issue Wednesday question that yours truly comes up with. And I wanted to highlight that as well. Some of you have probably seen it, but there was a really interesting, and some of you are going to say, Ann, you need to get a life. There was a really interesting development at the EEOC. There was an internal memo that was somehow leaked or distributed that said, hey, all EEOC investigators, close down your discrimination cases that are based on disparate impact. We've done a whole webinar on disparate impact cases. Those are cases that you have a neutral, facially neutral policy, but somehow it affects protected groups more than the majority. And there have been a bunch of cases that talk about that. Sometimes you require testing or whatever it might be. And somehow you have a statistical difference between, let's say, the white males who take the test, more of them get passed on that test than the white females or the Hispanic males or whatever classes you want to look at. That's a really interesting twist, that they're closing down almost all their cases on that. So it's actually good news for employers, but that may show you the direction that the EEOC is going in, that they're looking for direct discrimination and not sort of the indirect discrimination that's found in disparate impact cases. All right, let's move on to the crux of what we want to talk about today. And again, we're using a single scenario, and we're sort of going to just look at different permutations of it and how it works. And people can chime in, ask questions, whatever it may be. Naturally, I had to pick Emily as a name because Emily employee is in all my examples. So we have that she's a full-time employee according to this company's standards. She works in Allegheny County. What's the first little antennas that should go up here? Allegheny County. She's in Allegheny County. She's working in Allegheny County. We need to be cognizant of local law, right? She's been employed with this company for 10 years. She's a nurse, but really we can make her any profession that we wanted to. I just happened to pick nurse because it worked well with the example I wanted to do. And she works 2 16s a week. So in the healthcare industry, and we represented a ton of healthcare employers when I practiced, a 2 16 shift is often considered full-time in the healthcare industry, or 3 12s. So she's got a schedule that we consider full-time. What's the other thing that sort of pops into our mind? She's a 10-year employee. That's really important to me from a number of perspectives. When we are looking at local laws, we will look at here. That says to me, if you do the math, and I actually had to do the math, which was unfortunate for me, but I did it. She has worked enough hours under the Allegheny County leave laws that she should have a full bank of 40 hours, assuming she hasn't used any for some prior absence. And in our example, we're going to say no, she hasn't used any for a prior leave. The other thing that jumps out at me as we look at this and we say, okay, she's a 10-year employee, because oftentimes the call is made to the attorney when we want to fire this employee because she's been out too long, or the schedule with the need for leave is causing us all sorts of hiccups at work. If I look at somebody and I say, gosh, they're a 10-year employee and they have no discipline and their performance reviews are at least adequate, they don't have anything that stands out like a sore thumb, they are a much more sympathetic employee to a jury than somebody who's been a troublemaker or who has only been there a very short amount of time. And so part of what we're going to discuss today is some practical implications, not just legal implications of leaves. And one of the practical implications is you've got to keep in mind that MLA employee in front of a jury or in front of an EEOC investigator or in front of whoever you want to put her in front of looks pretty good right at the moment with a 10-year employment history without issues. That really shouldn't weigh into our legal decision, but it certainly weighs in on a practical level of how people will view her, investigators, jurors, whoever it might be. Okay, so I purposely picked a schedule for her that is not consecutive days. And again, this could be the cashier at the local gas station, right? They work certain days, certain shifts. My point with the schedule is it was non-consecutive because I want to discuss that. And so you see her schedule there for her 16-hour shifts. It's not always the same. So on week 1, good old Emily, who's never caused us a problem, is a no call, no show initially on Thursday, but then shows up at noon. So her hours are 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. She has blown off, for whatever reason, the first 5 hours of her shift. As an employer, what do? What have you already done? You probably called somebody in to cover for her, right? Especially if we have a smaller organization, and you'll see on the next slide, we're going to assume to start with that this employer only has 30 employees. What does that tell us legally? They're not big enough for FMLA. And that's a lot of you on this call. And we will talk about what if they were big enough for FMLA. But a lot of employers are under that 50 threshold, and they don't necessarily have to comply with FMLA. Let me caution everybody here on something that I saw with some regularity that was very unfortunate when I practiced. So a lot of times your smaller employers, they're looking to save money. They don't have the resources to be like, yeah, I really want to spend $700 an hour for that labor attorney to spend 10 hours looking at my handbook. So you get the handbook offline somewhere, you pay 25 bucks for it, and it's a good deal, right? And that can be fine. And I don't really have a problem with that, but you have to know what you're doing too. And oftentimes what we would see in handbooks for smaller companies is they inadvertently had FMLA language in there. What happens if you inadvertently have FMLA language in there? you get a detrimental reliance argument by the employee that they thought they were covered by FMLA because you were stupid enough to put it in your handbook and they signed off that they had read and agreed to the handbook. And shame on you, employer, for saying you had this leave whenever legally you didn't have to have it. Be careful of that. You don't want to agree to something in your canned handbook that you bought off the internet for 25 bucks that you don't need to agree to, or you at least need to think about it before you agree to it, because maybe you want to offer something shorter than that. Lots of companies have shorter periods of leave that they will sort of automatically do, but it's not the full 12 weeks or all the bells and whistles that come with FMLA leave that they want to put into their handbook. So what laws are in play here? And I really wish this was a seminar and we could have a real life discussion, but hopefully everybody's thinking about maybe there's no laws in play, right? What's the first? We don't know why right at the moment. She has been a no call, no show. In other words, she didn't call off to tell us she was going to be late or miss part of the shift. No show for the first 5 hours of her shift. Something we always need to keep in mind is there may be no law protecting her at all. If her car broke down, that's not protected under the law. It's an unfortunate circumstance. It's not protected though. Let's assume though that we might have a situation that is protected. What's coming into play? Well, it's not the FMLA, right? They're too small. Is it the Allegheny County sick leave ordinance? Probably, right? And just as a refresher on that, Allegheny County allows employees to have up to 40 hours of paid leave time for certain events. Okay, somebody chimed in. They said, what if our lawyer had us say that we are too small for FMLA in our handbook? That's fine, as long as that is a true statement. Sometimes employers grow faster and you just need to keep up with it. If you grow fast enough to be covered by the FMLA, then you need to add it in, obviously. But if you're too small, I have no issue with saying we're too small for FMLA. You're not going to get it. You don't have to put that in there. But what I'm suggesting is don't just use a canned handbook and not realize that certain provisions probably aren't going to apply to you. And the other thing I would suggest to small companies, because most small companies do have some type of leave policy. So if you think about a company this size, 25, 30 employees, whatever it might be, a lot of them, so, and you got to think about this as a business decision, a lot of your competitors have leave policies of some kind, because invariably you're going to get the pregnant lady, and if nothing else. And you may want to say, hey, we will give off 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever we decide. It doesn't necessarily have to be paid. Now, Allegheny County is a different story, but let's say we were in Butler County. We could say, hey, we will give off 6 unpaid weeks, contiguous weeks. We don't want people coming and going and, I'm going to work 2 days here and 3 days here, or whatever that might be. A lot of companies this size have some type of leave policy that will cover most short-term issues, like the delivery of a child, which that, in my view, that's not really short-term, but for our purposes here, or a broken leg, or a minor surgery. I have to go get my rotator cuff fixed or whatever it is. So it's a very common practice. If you don't have anything in your handbook and you're this small and you're saying, hey, I'm not covered by FMLA, that's a fine statement. But know that somebody someday is going to walk through your HR door and be like, hey, I have condition XYZ. I have a hernia. I need to go have it repaired. I'm going to be out 3 weeks. Or I'm pregnant. I'm going to deliver the baby in, I don't know, June. What's the policy on that? Somebody's going to ask that. And you can, at that point, scramble and decide what you want to do in accordance with the law. Or you can sort of be proactive and hopefully have something in your handbook that at least provides you with an initial amount of leave so that employees know there's something out there, even if it's not paid. If you're super small, it might not be realistic if you only have like 5 employees, but certainly at companies that are 23, 25, 30, 40 employees, they usually have something. All right, so Allegheny County leave law may be in play. I haven't made them in the city of Pittsburgh, but if they were in the city of Pittsburgh, we'd have that as well. That's going to really make a difference come January 2026, because the Pittsburgh leave law is increasing beyond the amount of time that Allegheny County requires. And so that is something we'll talk about and look at. What else could be in play here? She's female. The Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Is that applicable to this employer just in general? You betcha. There are over 15 employees. So absolutely, that could be a consideration on the table. What else could be out there? The ADA. So the Americans with Disabilities Act. Even if I'm not big enough to be covered by the FMLA, if I have 15 or more employees, I'm covered by the ADA, which mandates leaves of absence in certain disability situations. Finally, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, what if she's out because she woke up with severe back pain because she lifted the heavy patient the other day and she didn't realize she was injured until this morning when she woke up and she couldn't even move to get to her phone to call us. Any of those laws may be at play here, and that's what we're looking for to see if we have a concern under any of those laws. So can we discipline her for a no call, no show? If we're functioning under any of those laws, no, we can't, because those are all job protected leaves. And by the way, even if you're smaller than 15 employees for the ADA, Pennsylvania has the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, which mirrors in most part the federal laws regarding disability, discrimination, and accommodation and all that good stuff. That starts with 4 employees. So you can be quite small and have a disability issue. And certainly if you're in the city of Pittsburgh, their leave law starts with 1 employee. There's different amounts of leave the employee can take, but with 1 employee, you have a leave issue, a paid leave issue in that case. What about a no-fault attendance policy where we just ping points at people, whether it's the car that broke down or she has morning sickness, or she has migraines or depression, something that might qualify as a disability? That, again, we can't do if we're looking at a job protected leave under any of the laws that I just mentioned. And that would include FMLA, by the way, as well. So you cannot ping or ding employees under a no-fault attendance policy if there's a law in play that provides job protected leave for them. All right, let's get down to some nitty-gritty. You have called in your most reliable employee who's always there for you. Do we need to send the replacement home? Can we let Emily work? The answer to that in Allegheny County is going to be, we have to let Emily work. It's up to you whether you send the replacement home or whether you find something else for that replacement to do because she's a valuable employee and you don't want to tick her off and she came in at the last minute and whatever. There may be some good practical reasons why you don't want to tick off the replacement and you're going to let her work out whatever number of hours is appropriate. But under the Allegheny County leave law, assuming that it's applicable here, and we'll talk about what would cause it to be applicable, you can't force a person to take more leave than they need. And you can't force them to take it in increments greater than an hour or the smallest increment that you keep other leave time in. So I'm going to assume that we keep leave time in hours. And by sheer dumb luck, she walked in right at noon. So we have a solid 5-hour mark there. If she has a qualifying reason under the Allegheny County leave law, and she didn't call off because it was an emergency situation, and I will tell you, you're going to have a hard time fighting whether she was able to call off or not, we have to let her work. Okay, we have another question here. Okay, so this gets into the next question in my slide here, but let me, an attendee has asked, so the employee has not advised of any ADA or FMLA, et cetera, any of these protected issues that we're talking about previously. She just shows up late and the employer has no recourse. So the question here is, do we become an ostrich with our head in the sand? She shows up late and says, I had an emergency. That's all she says to us. Do we take the ostrich standpoint and say, I'm not going to ask anything. I don't want to know. She didn't trigger anything by saying, I had an emergency because I had morning sickness, or I had an emergency because I have depression. Pick your poison, whatever it might be. I'm just going to ding her for the absence. I'm going to discipline her for the no call, no show in violation of our policy. And I'm going to send her home because she just told me she has an emergency and I don't know what it is. And she hasn't used the magical words, so to speak, to trigger one of these laws. So I'm going to strongly, did I mention strongly? Recommend that you don't take that position at all. I would suggest to you that her use of the word emergency is going to trigger a responsibility on our end to ask further as to what is going on, which sort of leads to my next question is, can we get some type of note or proof of the emergency? So first of all, can we even ask the question, hey, Emily, what the heck happened? You've been a great employee for 10 years. What in the world happened today? Absolutely. I think we ask that question. I think the case law in this area is crystal clear that they don't have to use magic words to say, I have morning sickness, or I have a disability, or I have depression. All they need to do is say enough that it raises a question in our mind as to what's going on. And I think anybody who hears I had an emergency, the next question is, can you tell us what happened, right? Now, if she refuses and says, insert your favorite four-letter words, it's none of your business, then yes, I think we move forward with discipline. We attempted to talk to her. We attempted to find out what went wrong. She was uncooperative. Hopefully we're documenting this. And ideally we might have a witness to the conversation, like a supervisor or somebody and HR. But let's say she says, I had a car problem. Again, we're back to the discipline situation, right? She had a flat tire. Whatever our normal discipline policy would be, we implement it. Whatever our attendance, whether it's points or not, or whatever we've got going, we will do that. But let's assume she says, I was just really sick, or my kid was really sick. What do we do with that? Can we demand, Emily, darn it, tell us why you're sick. We need to know. We need to know all the details, and we need the doctor's report, and we need a doctor's note, and this, that, and the next thing. If we're in Allegheny County, so I have no problem with asking the question. At the point where we find out the reason, we're at a crossroads or the road divides, right? If it's a non-covered reason or she refuses to tell us, we're going down the path of discipline. Whatever would be typical. We're not going to treat her differently. We're going to do whatever we would for any other employee in this situation. If she says, I'm sick, or I was sick, and that's kind of a vague answer, right? Like maybe she has the sniffles. Maybe she has morning sickness, and that's just terrible and awful. Maybe she has severe depression and she was suicidal that morning and had to talk to her psychiatrist and get talked down off the cliff or whatever. Do we get to find all that out? So right at this point in our example with Emily here, and we're in Allegheny County, the answer is no. So it's enough that she said she was sick or her kid was sick. Or maybe it's her step-grandparent, because the Allegheny County and Pittsburgh leave laws are broad enough to cover what I would consider very remote relatives that certainly aren't covered by FMLA if this employer was big enough to be FMLA. And unfortunately for employers, the Allegheny County and Pittsburgh sick leave laws say, hey, you can't get a note. you can't ask questions that are invasive. The employee does not have to give you a diagnosis. It's enough that they trigger, just being sick, trigger the opportunity for the paid leave. So at that point, right, at this point, we only have 5 hours that she has missed. We don't have more. At a certain point, we can get a note, and we'll talk about that. We don't necessarily have any information that it's a disability to require accommodation. What we appear to have here is an issue under the Allegheny County leave law. We don't have any information that would indicate a Pregnant Workers Fairness Act issue as well. So what do? Well, she's worked there for 10 years. She has to have at least that 40-hour bank for the Allegheny County sick leave law. If she was in Pittsburgh come 1/1/26, she would have even more. She'd have 72 hours banked. So we can't ask for proof of the emergency. And I know everybody here is probably saying, well, somebody's going to abuse this. You betcha they're going to abuse it. I think abuse is unfortunately a cost of doing business sometimes because every law gets abused. We are stuck with her explanation that she was sick. And right now, I don't think there's more because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. I don't necessarily think we need to go running around saying, hey, you know what? We got a disability policy. And you know what? If you're pregnant, we can do this. And whatever it is we want to be proactive on. At this point, I don't think she's given us enough information or had that long of an absence to trigger us going down rabbit holes and pulling out all sorts of potential leaves for her that are in our handbook, hopefully. Can we get a fitness for duty slip? No, that's not permissible either. What we're going to do is she's going to get paid for all 16 hours that she should have worked that day. She's going to get paid for 5 hours of the absence under the Allegheny County leave law, or Pittsburgh if we were there. And she's going to get paid for the 11 that she worked. So if she's getting paid, is it coming out of her PTO bank? Can we ding her PTO bank for the 5 hours for her no call, no show? I was sick, or my kid was sick, or my step grandparent was sick, or whatever remote relative. And there's a whole list of them under these leave laws that she might have that she's caring for. And so the answer there is it really depends on what your PTO policy says. So we covered Pittsburgh and Allegheny County a couple of times now, and they've been hugely well-attended seminars or webinars, and I'm glad for that. But it also shows people have a lot of questions because we've also gotten a lot of follow-up questions on this. So the PTO in this situation, so right now, the only law that we're aware of is the Allegheny County sick leave law that's going to cover her. Can we ding her PTO bank? It depends entirely on what our PTO policy says. You want to be able to ding her PTO bank. You don't want her to double dip and have the situation where we have to pay her because we failed to properly provide rules for our PTO that match the Allegheny County sick leave law. So in our PTO, if we say she can use it for any reason at all, or maybe we say she uses it for any reason consistent with the Allegheny County or Pittsburgh paid sick leave ordinances, and in the increments that those laws allow, which are no more than an hour, and we comply with the notice provisions, which essentially are non-existent if we're really being honest about it, because that ordinance, both of them say, yeah, they can give you and should give you advance notice, but if it's an emergency, you can't ding them for it. What employee isn't going to be smart enough to say it was an emergency if they are not giving you advance notice? So if your PTO policy meets all the bells and whistles of the Allegheny County leave law or the Pittsburgh leave law, then yes, the payment for the PTO is coming out of her leave bank. So let's say you front load 40 hours for everybody, or 80 hours, whatever it is that you front load, or she has earned that much somehow because she should at least have 40 hours in Allegheny County. Come January, 72 hours in Pittsburgh. That 5 hours will come out of the PTO bank, so we don't run into a situation where she double dips. And we can't have some sort of PTO policy where we say, hey, you can only use PTO in half-day increments, because that would violate the Allegheny County leave law or Pittsburgh, because remember, it's an hour increment. So we're just going to pay the 5 hours. We're not going to force her to use more PTO than is necessary. And again, hopefully, we have tailored our PTO policy to comply with those two ordinances so that the time comes out of there and we don't have a situation where she has a separate bank of time because we have messed up our PTO policy. And now she's getting paid under the Allegheny County leave law for those 5 hours, plus she still has all of her PTO. That's not the situation you want. Okay, on week 2, that was just week 1 that gave us a headache. On week 2, our call-off policy asks for at least 24 hours advance notice. She calls off on Friday with 2 hours advance notice. Can we discipline her for the late call-off? I'm sorry. So remember here, she was working Tuesday and Thursday. She came in late Thursday. On week 2, she comes in late. She calls off on Friday with 2 hours notice. Can we discipline? No. We again can ask the questions as to what is going on and what has happened. Can she take the whole day off? Yeah, and it's going to be paid because she has at least 40 hours of time. Do we get a note or explanation? This is the second time she's done this. And let's think about this. If she worked a normal 8-hour shift, we'd be at almost the 3-day mark, right? That Friday would be 2 8 hours and week 1 would have been 5 hours. No, we still can't get a note or explanation. It's enough that she gives us a relatively vague answer under Allegheny County leave laws that she or her kid or the step-grandparent or whoever is ill. That's where we're at. Is she getting paid? Yes. Where's the payment source? Again, my hope and prayer is your PTO policy complies with these 2 laws and that the payment source will be the PTO bank that she has. All right, let's move on to week 3. Now she's a no call, no show on Saturday. And by the way, the fact that she didn't follow our call off policy last week is irrelevant because again, if it's an emergency, she only has to give us as much notice as is practical. And if you want to fight that, the burden of proof is on your shoulders to say, hey, that she could have given us more notice. She should have given us more notice. She knows she has depression. She knows that that was a possibility, or she knows she has morning sickness. She knows she could be ill in the morning. You're probably not going anywhere with that realistically in front of the Allegheny County board that handles these cases. They are going to give her the benefit of the doubt. So unlikely that you're going anywhere with the explanation or the argument that she should have given us more notice, that it was practical for her to do so. This is her 3rd absence. So some of you may be sitting there saying, hey, I think I remember something from, those wonderful Allegheny County and Pittsburgh leave law webinars that Ann did about 3 days and I can get a note. Well, there is something in those laws about 3 days, but it's 3 consecutive days. Doesn't matter the number of hours that might be worked. It's 3 consecutive work days. In this case, we don't have 3 consecutive work days. Well, she has, by either sheer dumb luck or intentionally, if she's trying to play the system, she has taken off so that there are work days in between the absences. We don't have 3 contiguous work days yet. So we still don't know the real what's going on here. Let's just pretend we did have 3 contiguous work days, that she did this to us 3 days in a row. We would be entitled to a medical document. What is that medical document? Well, it doesn't have to be a doctor. It can be a nurse practitioner or a chiropractor or anybody that's in the healthcare field, basically, that would make sense. It does not need to give us any detailed information at all. So it may just say, hey, Emily had an illness that qualifies under the Allegheny County Sick Leave Ordinance. That is sufficient for a note under that ordinance. Same thing with Pittsburgh, or her kid, or her step-grandparent, or whoever it is. So we're not going to get details. We're not going to get information. I certainly, if somebody has called off 3 contiguous days, I would ask for the note because that's our right. And I think, to limit abuses, we exercise our rights. We're not going to eliminate all abuses, but we don't want to be a pushover either. At this point, is she getting paid? Well, she has used about 21 hours of her PTO time, which hopefully, again, complies with the Allegheny County sick leave law. So she may not get paid for all of it. And she may not have, in this example, if she, at the end of this example, she has had about 37 hours, she's almost at the end of her Allegheny County paid leave law protection, right? She has another 3 hours. So at this point, I would be proactive because I think at this point, she's sending up red flags to us. And hopefully we're going to be proactive in a way that's humane and helpful to her, as well as helpful to us. So somebody has a question here. Let me see if I can get over to it. Okay. So somebody has asked, are you going to cover any other counties? I was under the impression that this was a general ACA leave webinar. So the ACA is the Affordable Care Act. Maybe you meant ADA. We are going to cover the ADA. As far as counties, Philadelphia has rules regarding sick leave as well. But primarily, most folks here, I think, are in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. So those are the counties we are focusing on. CTR is having a separate ACA Affordable Care Act webinar next week. So maybe you're thinking of that. I don't know. So hopefully that just helps you out there. All right. So yes, at this point, I would take some proactive steps. And I would say, hey, Emily, you're reaching the end of your paid time off. And we're concerned. And we have certain policies in our handbook. If you want to give us more details about what's going on, there may be options for you here that we can help you with. That hopefully opens the door to her saying something about, you know what, I'm not just ill, I'm pregnant. I'm not just ill. I have a situation where, I have major depression. They're working on my psych meds, whatever it is. All right, so here we go again. She calls off appropriately for Monday. She's going to use her last 3 hours, but calls off late for Wednesday. What's she getting paid for? Well, we have about 3 hours of time left that she's getting paid for. Unless we are more generous and have a more generous paid leave or PTO policy. If we have front-loaded 80 hours, she may get paid more, or she has earned 80 hours of PTO or whatever it is. However, for those additional hours, let's say for Wednesday, if she has not provided us with any additional information and she is calls off late and she's not giving us any reason to protect her, then at that point we have a discipline situation, right? So we would do that. Yeah, we have a few questions here. Let me see if I can't get over to them. Okay, if we have a policy regarding no show, no call for 3 consecutive scheduled shifts is considered job abandonment, can we terminate the staff for violating this policy? So it depends if you've had any communication with the person or not. If the person has just blown you off, and again, I would never be the ostrich with the head in the sand. I think that plays very poorly to investigators or anybody else who's looking at this. And the person has ignored our phone call to them saying, hey, what's going on? Then yes, I think we can move forward. If we've had a conversation with that person and they've said, oh, I've just been really sick, or my kid's been really sick, or the step grandparent, then we're in a different situation. right? We're in this situation where we're saying, maybe we want to fight whether it was practical for them to give us notice, knowing that we're not going to get too far probably with that argument. But no call, no show for 3 days is a lot harder for that person to show it wasn't practical for them to call in. It depends what kind of conversation we have had. Okay, so is there a maximum number of weeks allowed? We'll get to that in a second. So under the Allegheny County sick leave law, there is the 40 hours, or in Pittsburgh, there soon will be 72 hours if you're over 25 employees. We may at this point be disciplining her if she's not giving us a reason to protect her. We may also be thinking if she has given us a reason to protect her, maybe it's the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Maybe it's the Americans with Disabilities Act. Maybe it's the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, which has a disability provision in it. If we're under those, then with respect to the ADA or the PHRA, we are in the interactive process where we're going to sit down with her, either on the phone or in person, and talk to her about what she needs. If she has said something like, I have depression, or I have horrendous back problems, whatever it is, we may, at that point, may be looking at whether we have a disability, which would again remove her from the discipline system and put her into a leave of absence system. To answer the one attendee's question, how long is the leave? Well, under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, if we have that issue going on, there is an assumption that at least 40 weeks is appropriate. That's a long time for a small employer, but if you're 15 or more employees, you're covered by that. Under the ADA, we don't even have that guidance. We have to give them a leave that is not an undue hardship to us. And so what do we look at? We look at past practice. Did we give Joe, who had a broken leg, 10 weeks off? If we have a past practice like that and Emily has depression, there's a pretty good argument that Emily gets at least the 10 weeks of that. But we're going to look at her particular position, how difficult it is for us to replace her, how much leave we can give her. All right, moving along because we're a little behind here. So let's look at a bunch of permutations here, and I'll kind of run through this so that we keep ourselves on time more or less, although I'm happy to stay around for any questions you might have. So what if all the reasons for her absences was that her child was terminally ill? The Allegheny County law, or Pittsburgh, would protect her. The ADA does not. This is a challenging situation because she has a super sympathetic situation here. And there's no protection for her. And so we would look at what we have done for other people in similar situations, meaning if somebody had a sick kid or a sick relative, or perhaps what we even do for sick employees. We may want to, if we haven't set a leave of absence policy in our handbook already, we may want to think about that, setting a precedent here. That's a challenging situation because it's sympathetic. What if she wasn't with the terminally ill kid, but rather was caring for the 4 other children that she has while her hubby was with the sick kid? There's a great case out of Texas that's actually an FMLA case that says she's still protected because emotional support, support for the rest of the family members, if this was an FMLA employer, would extend to her and she'd have FMLA protection. Other laws, though, aren't going to extend to her. So unless this is an FMLA employer, there's really not a lot of protection for her. And she's sort of at the mercy of the company for what they want to do and what precedent they either have set or will set based on this. What if she has severe depression and she's suicidal and she's going to check herself into a mental health hospital for intensive inpatient treatment that will last 3 to 4 months? And by the way, you can replace depression here with any disability you want, an eating disorder. Maybe she's having gastric bypass surgery, a spinal fusion. Lots of things might qualify as a disability for her. That could be long-term, obesity can qualify as a disability. What do we do with this? If we're an FMLA employer, then 12 weeks is a no-brainer. But if we're not, then we have to, again, be in the interactive process with her, which will give us doctor's notes to establish that this is a necessary leave of absence and the period required for the absence. And we will then look at our past practice as well as her particular job, if it's different from the jobs in the past where we've had a past practice of leave, and see whether we can reasonably accommodate this or not, or if there's an alternate accommodation that we might offer other than just leave. Okay, step grandparent with a bad case of flu. We've already covered this. The Allegheny County sick leave law will cover it, but after that, FMLA doesn't cover it, ADA doesn't cover it. There ain't nothing that's going to cover this. So unless we have our own leave policy that is generous, she has no protection here. What if her car broke down, doesn't have gas money? We kind of already covered that. It's not covered on any laws. What about her daughter's school was closed due to a government health order? That's covered under the Allegheny County and Pittsburgh sick leave laws. So if that was her original issue, and she said, hey, you know, they got some sort of contagious germ and it's closed, that she's going to qualify for leave under Allegheny County and Pittsburgh, but not under the ADA or anything else. What if she's attending school meetings like an IEP? That would indicate that her child has a disability. That's not covered either, at least in Pennsylvania. I will caution you that certain states do provide time off for school meetings up to a certain threshold. Illinois is one of those states. So you can get like 5 or 6 hours of time off every year in those states to go attend school meetings. What if she strained her back at work? Well, now we have an additional law, right? Workers' comp. Maybe she didn't tell us to the next day, but we still have to report that injury. And now we're working with our carrier. And if we fire her, first of all, we have run afoul of the ADA probably, and the Allegheny County sick leave laws, et cetera. So we're going to let those run. But let's say we're at the end of our rope and we're saying, gosh, she's been out like 3 or 4 months with this back injury. What do we do with her? The first call is to your insurance carrier to say, we're thinking about terminating her. And if we do that, does that bother you guys in the sense that were you going to try to bring her back on light duty or anything like that? Or maybe you're trying to settle out the workers' comp claim. And if you fire her, the workers' comp claim is going to be a lot more expensive to settle out. Actually had this case when I practiced. What if she's a supervisor who strained her back while lifting inappropriately, violating the company's policy on that? She was a supervisor and had a subordinate helping her lift incorrectly. In this case, the employer fired her before ever talking to legal counsel. We actually won the case. That's a tough one to win, though, because it looks like retaliation. It also looks like you didn't follow your progressive discipline. So be careful if the injury is because of a workplace policy violation. What if she's pregnant? What if she's undergoing in vitro fertilization treatment? Menopause issues. Needs time off either for an abortion or due to complications from an abortion or postpartum depression. All of these, every single one of these is covered under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So if we have a situation where she has told us one of these issues or things related to them, we have a Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which is going to require us, and it's strongly suggested in the regulations, up to a 40-week leave of absence, perhaps even up to 52 weeks, depending on our situation. That's a very long leave of absence for these types of conditions. The burden of proof would be on you as the employer to establish that the recommended leave time of 40 or 52 weeks is somehow an undue hardship. And given that the EEOC doesn't think that it is, that's going to be a tough burden for you to meet if you deny leave. Also know that if she says, hey, I have morning sickness, I need to come in late, I'll be fine by noon. We can't force her to take off more time than she needs under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So if she needs a schedule adjustment, we could say, okay, we're going to do noon to whatever, 7 or something. And we don't necessarily even get a doctor's note for that because certain accommodations under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, like additional bathroom breaks, time off for morning sickness, the need to eat additional little snacks or meals are considered such basic problems in any pregnancy that it should be a no-brainer for an employer and they shouldn't need a doctor's note. Now, if it's a more complex thing, then yes, we will get a doctor's note to establish the need for whatever accommodation, but simple accommodations, we are not entitled to a note for that or a letter or whatever. If we're an FMLA employer, we're going to be running FMLA with respect to any of these conditions as well. And we want to run every possible leave law at the same time so that we have a situation, whether it's workers' comp or the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act or the Allegheny County leave law, that we're running FMLA at the same time as any ADA leave, any Allegheny County leave, any Pregnant Workers Fairness Act leave, whatever it might be. And granted, sometimes we won't know right away whether or not it is FMLA leave. But when we figure it out, we're going to run it, and we may even backdate it depending how close in time we are to when the problem started and whether there would be any detrimental harm to her from us backdating it. All right, what if we only had 6 employees? And I do see a couple questions coming in. I'm going to finish this and then we will get to those questions. Allegheny County, you're too small for the Allegheny County leave law. So what you're covered by is you're too small for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. What you're covered by is the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act and Workers' Comp. Those are the 2 laws that you would be looking at, plus any leave policy that you might generously provide. Pittsburgh, you're covered at 1 employee. So she would have time available even if you only had 6 employees there. Butler County, again, there's no ordinance, local ordinance there, but you would have the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, which has disability provisions and workers' comp at play as potential laws that you would be looking at for any type of leave that was needed here. And again, what's reasonable in terms of leave for a 6-person company is very different than what is reasonable for a 25 or 30-person company or a 100-person company or the Walmarts of the world. So it's a case-by-case analysis. Again, what if she asked for 6 weeks, and then I'm going to condense this so that I respect everybody's time. She asked for 2 more weeks and then 2 more weeks. At what point does it become unreasonable? What if at the end of 10 weeks, she says she just needs 3 more days? That becomes a really sticky situation for employers. There's a great case out there that says at some point, this becomes unreasonable when the person just continues to ask for more and more time. If you're an FMLA employer, obviously this would be under the 12 weeks, so she'd still have FMLA. But if you're that 6-person employer or maybe the 20-person employer, at some point this is unreasonable. And that case, which isn't in our jurisdiction, but still is a nice case to look at, says, hey, 3 bites of the apple of extending your leave is probably as reasonable as it gets. So something to keep in mind if you have this situation to talk to counsel with and talk about whether that case might be helpful to you. Okay. Again, we've already covered this sort of, the busiest time is in the mornings, but she wants that off due to morning sickness. Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, if we're covered by it, we're stuck. So that is what it is. We're going to have a problem. We're going to have to figure out how to handle those med passes without her, because that's going to be a reasonable accommodation to allow her to come in late. And again, workers' comp, we're going to look at light duty perhaps for her to limit the value of that claim, as well as be in communication with our insurer to see whether they're settling it out or what they're going to do with it, so we don't make it a more expensive claim. Okay, we kind of talked about this too. FMLA, when do we start running it? Let's say we wanted to start running it after her 2nd absence. She hasn't exhausted the Allegheny County leave yet. That's okay. We can do that. And we can give her the forms because we're trying to comply with a different law. And the Allegheny County and Pittsburgh leave laws even talk about the fact that if we have other laws that we're complying with, we can get the medical certification, whether it's for her child, whatever family member might qualify, which is much more narrow under the FMLA than under the Allegheny County or Pittsburgh sick leave law. Is it retroactive? I'm a fan of making it retroactive if we're close in time. I don't reach back months into the past to make it retroactive. But in her case, let's say we're on absence number 3, and we now know it's going to be FMLA related. Then yes, I think we could make it retroactive because the test is whether or not we have somehow caused her to detrimentally rely on the fact that it wasn't FMLA. And I think that close in time, we can make a pretty good argument that we haven't done anything that she would detrimentally rely on. Okay, last but not least, because this is really important, leave year designation means so much. What if you fail to designate a leave year, whether it's under the Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, or FMLA? If you fail to designate a leave year, the assumption is it's a calendar year leave. How do you get in trouble there? Well, let's assume that in October, maybe November, December, wherever it is, she takes that 40 hours. Maybe we'll put it in December to make the example more dramatic. Then in January, you front load another 40 hours. All of a sudden, we have all that time that she can sort of take together because it's a calendar leave year. Same thing with FMLA, which is an even worse result. You want a looking backward 12-month period for FMLA. To do anything else is problematic. And the way that would play out if you don't have a leave year set is she'll take 12 weeks, October through December. January 1, she's eligible for another 12 weeks. Now she's out 24 consecutive weeks. So that's a real problem under the FMLA if you haven't designated a leave year, which hopefully is a backward-looking, rolling 12-month leave year. All right, let me get to the last questions here. Anybody who is tired of this topic can surely feel free to go and have lunch or whatever you want to do. And then we'll answer these questions as well. So all these state and local mandated leave legal implications are making me hope for faster acceleration of AI replacing as many employees as possible. I guess that's not a question, just venting. I can understand why you vent. The laws are meant to favor the employees, and that just is a cost of doing business. They don't favor the employers. Okay, I think that somebody else said something could be answered offline. That's fine, we can do that. And otherwise, thanks everybody for attending. There is the ACA webinar next week if that's what you were looking for. Otherwise, take care and I'll see you next month.